Beyond Economics and Back. Tinklalaidę rengia Lietuvos Laisvosios Rinkos Institutas. Hello, welcome to the podcast Beyond Economics and Back. I am Elena Leontjeva, the president of the Lithuanian Free Market Institute. Today, my guest is Lord Syed Kamall. Hello, Syed.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And welcome to Lithuania. We are very pleased to have you.
Thank you. Acho.
Great. And Syed is also a professor at St. Mary's University in UK.
That's right, yes.
And recently you have joined the House of Lords.
Yes.
My first question is, did it change your understanding of the economic domain of our life and the political domain? Because you were quite active in political life before that. How does it feel to become Lord? What new responsibilities for the society do you feel today?
So I think I should explain, in the UK, the House of Lords is really the second chamber. Think about it as almost an appointed Senate. It's made up of some members of the House of Lords who are hereditary, so it has a link with history. But also most peers and most members of the House of Lords are appointed by the government or the opposition, or recommended by the other parties. I think in terms of economics and economic life, obviously politics, everyone wants a better life for everyone, whichever part of the political spectrum you're on. It's where we disagree is on how you achieve that. And I also think, really, when you think about politics and economics, if you think about the economic definition of scarcity, we don't have unlimited pots of money, and government has to think about the money it collects from taxpayers and how it spends that and what are the trade-offs. And therefore, I think most of our debates tend to be about where the government has its priorities, its legislation, but inevitably it comes up against where the government chooses to allocate taxpayers' income in resources.
So it's bringing like long-term perspective to the politics, which unfortunately usually tend to be too short-sighted.
I wish that were true, but I think also we are all members of political parties, and one of the things that we have to understand, if you read public choice theory, for example, is that politicians want to be re-elected, and therefore, even though, for example, economically, we might be able to say, if we spend this money now, in 10 years' time or 20 years' time, we will save the economy or the country a large amount of money. That is too long for the democratic cycle of elections and politicians who want to get re-elected.
But if you are a live peer, you are there in the House anyway. So
yes.
You don't have this pressure of the need to be re-elected.
Yes.
So you may have the privilege of a long-term vision for the country?
Oh, yes. I mean, I would hope so. I think it depends on the individual peers. But I try to take a long-term view of the economy, but also at the same time understanding the reality of the lower house or the House of Commons is based on electoral cycles and politicians from every party wanting to get re-elected. But also, as in the House of Lords, we are very much a revising chamber. So we assess or analyse or probe the government's legislation, and we go into very real detail about what the government is proposing and try to improve the law.
I hope that we would have such a house in Lithuania and in other European countries as well, because it sounds like bringing a good balance to the politics, which in our case frequently is too short-sighted.
Right, yes. I mean, the House of Lords has its critics. People don't like the fact that it's appointed. People don't like the fact that there are still hereditary peers who are there because of their parents or grandparents or great-great-grandparents. But those appointed peers, I think, are about to be abolished. There is legislation to abolish them, and we will be a wholly appointed house. And that has its own criticism as well. Whichever method or system you have for the upper house, there will be some criticism. Even if we have a fully elected house, people will be worried about gridlock between the two houses.
Sure, people are always unsatisfied, and that's our studies of scarcity and lack give a very good explanation to that, because we as human beings, we always see something which is not perfect, which is not complete, and it triggers our minds to complete it, to make it perfect, to advance. So being insatiable and being not always at peace with everything is a part of being a creature that has aims, because to have aims, you have to be not satisfied with the status quo. So being more mature, I become more at peace with people being not satisfied with the status quo. And let me ask you, what very unique economic insights do you bring in your service? Because in our studies, we understand that economics became too much a science of a spreadsheet, numbers. When people ask me about my profession and they say I'm an economist, I say, oh, you're a master of numbers. No, I'm not a master of numbers. I would like to be a master of understanding of a human being. So how to reunite economics with the human nature, with who we are? And is it at all possible to recover economics as a science of a human being?
I mean, we can try. But if you look at a lot of academia and economics, there's quite often a very strong econometric part to it with spreadsheets and regression analysis, for example. But I think in politics, one of the things I do try to explain, and particularly from the Austrian school perspective, is how things emerge. So I remember we had a debate about competition, and I tried to explain markets from first principles. And I criticised the textbook version of markets, of perfect markets, perfect information, and then having made all those assumptions, the textbook then tells you, well, actually markets are not perfect. So we have monopolistic markets, or we have oligopolistic markets, or we have monopoly, all those things. But I like to build it up from first principles, and I say that every day there are willing buyers and willing sellers willing to engage in a transaction for mutual benefit, and if you aggregate up all those transactions, that is the market. It's a spontaneous emergence of market. It's not perfect, and in fact, that's what creates a role for entrepreneurs, as Israel Kirzner writes. Entrepreneurs see opportunities. They recognise the market is not perfect and there's not perfect information, and they are able to put together certain inputs and certain knowledge to create something, a product or service for consumers may want to buy or may not want to buy, because entrepreneurs also fail.
Yes. So entrepreneur is a person who always studies the needs of man, right? And finds the way to respond to the needs of man.
Yes, I mean, I think that, but I'm not sure entrepreneurs would always see themselves in that way. They see, some of them just want to make money, and that's not a bad thing. Some of them want to see a service or a product that no one has thought of, and wonder how to put that together and take that product or service to market. Now, I know Israel Kirzner, for example, writes about entrepreneurial alertness. They see the opportunity, but I think there's a step in between where not everyone who's alert to an opportunity acts upon that opportunity, because they have a comfortable job, or they're worried about not having any money for a year or two. They don't want to take a risk. They may have a family. They have to pay bills. So there's a difference between alertness and actually doing something as an entrepreneur.
In a conference at the University of Buckingham, where I participated at your kind invitation, there was one lecture which presented really shocking statistics about morality of capitalism. I don't remember the precise numbers, but the essence was that more than half of businessmen would agree that capitalism is not moral. Is it really a problem for business community that people do not understand the moral grounds of capitalism? And if they see that business is immoral but are still involved every day, some as a businessman, some as an employee in a private enterprise, then our society is at a big moral challenge.
Yes, I think so. But I think also at the same time, I genuinely don't know, and I haven't given enough thought to it, about how big a problem that is. Because people need businesses. They need businesses to create wealth, to create jobs, but also to pay taxes. And I remember in 1997 when we had a new Labour government, our Socialist Party became more social democratic. We, as I'm a conservative politician, we struggled to understand the new Labour Party because they were not the old-fashioned socialists. And one of my friends from Labour said to me, what you have to understand is that we understand that if you want socialism, you need capitalism to pay for it. So we want there to be a thriving business community. We want people to earn lots of money so they can pay taxes, and then we can spend it on our programs.
As one of my friends says, the biggest problem of capitalism is that it creates such riches that the temptation to redistribute those riches is increasing.
Yes.
And if capitalism fails or is diminished, then there are no riches to be reallocated by the socialist government.
Exactly, and you all know that from living in this part of the world, where we tried to eradicate the profit, or there was an attempt to eradicate the profit motive, because in itself it was seen as a bad thing. But if you don't have entrepreneurs creating wealth and paying taxes, then you saw what happened to the economy. And in fact, the only way, in some ways, that Ronald Reagan was able to help bring about the dissolution of the Soviet Union was simply to create more wealth and outspend the Soviets. Especially when he talked about the Star Wars program, he was effectively saying to the Soviets at the time, I can outspend you, and you can't keep up.
Yeah. It was not only profit which was abolished under the Soviet rules, it was the private property, and together with private property also private responsibility.
Yes.
And without responsibility, as we found out, there is a shortage of everything.
Yes.
And as Hayek correctly explained, the most powerful computers cannot calculate and cannot bring the demands of people with the supply of the government.
Yes.
So there was a complete shortage of everything. But profit is really a big trigger for society, for Western society, even today. So why so many people do not understand the role of profit, which I think every student of economics should understand?
Yes, I think it's difficult. I think profit is always portrayed as it just goes back into the money of shareholders, and they don't, and people don't think enough about the role of profit. One, as a motivator; two, as a way to allocate resources; three, as the money that is made by companies quite often is reinvested back in the company, or it's reinvested in the workers. But also, of course, you have to pay some of that money as a reward to shareholders who have bought the shares or invested in that company. And not everyone understands that. They think when they see the headline profit in the newspapers, they think that money is all going into the pockets of a very rich person.
Yeah, but if we see also the profit motive and its role in how society is organized, this is the surface of the profit, the interest, the
Yes.
motivation, the sharing, but the deeper layers, they are related to information moving from the demand side to the supply side, from the consumers to the suppliers. And this information is much more useful and much more sophisticated than the computers in the Gosplan of Soviet Union.
Yes.
And this is very sophisticated role which profit plays, because the resources which were cheaper, they become more valuable at the end. Yes. And the surplus is the profit.
Yes.
Right? So it allows the society to control, to govern the allocation of resources in the society, and to make sure that we do not spoil resources.
Yes.
But this deeper layer is not seen by the society. Is it right?
Yes, but also people don't have the time to think about profit in a deeper sense. And quite often, if you look at our newspapers or our media, when they report on profit, it will be about the number, and that seems an awful lot of money. Mm-hmm. And even if the company has performed well and created more jobs, people don't think about that. They think about the large amount of money going to someone's pockets. But also there are many stories, as we know, of organisations that have been perhaps helped by the government, by taxpayers. Think about the banks after the financial crisis, mm-hmm. or the companies that were bailed out with taxpayers' money, and then they make massive amounts of profit and they are providing bad services. That gives profit a bad name because it seems unfair. Why are these people who have been bailed out but with taxpayers' money now making large profits and not giving enough back to society? So it depends on how the media reports profit as well. Very few I'm trying to think of any media reports. This company made this much profit, the headline, and it's going to be, and this amount's going to be reinvested back in the company. This amount will go to taxes. This amount will be, paid to the workers, and this amount of money will go to the shareholders who invested in the company in the first place. Very few newspaper or media or TV programs will report what is profit and what happens to it. All you see is a headline. Billions or millions of pounds profit.
So is it a utopia for us to have a hope that society could understand, could comprehend this deeper role of profit? Or economics should be taught in another way? Or economics should be reconnected with moral issues, with the ethics of business?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of those. I don't think there is one answer or one silver bullet. I think it's important that each of us can communicate in a different way. So, for example, when I speak in Parliament, I will talk about the way, the markets from first principles, but also I think we ought to talk about what happens to profit and explain that profit, it just doesn't simply, if you see a headline in the newspaper, this company made £3 billion profit, you then explain what happened to that money or what happens to that profit and how much of it goes to shareholders, how much is reinvested. I think we have to go further than just say £3 billion profit, because that sounds like a lot of money. And people also don't think about the investment. You think about, for example, mobile phone companies. They may make operating profits, but they have to reinvest into better infrastructure, into more towers, more bases, better technology to constantly improve the network. This is why our mobile phones are getting, faster and faster, and we can get more data. That money didn't come from nowhere. Companies had to make a profit to reinvest that money back into the infrastructure.
Yeah, this discourse reminds me of a tax proposal which is successfully implemented in Estonia, Latvia, and partially in Poland. And the idea is that profits should not be taxed as such, but all reinvestment of profit should be tax-free, and only dividend allocation should be taxed. So this idea first came up to our brainstorming session in 1995, and it was successfully implemented in Estonia in the year 2000, in Latvia in 2018, and later in Poland. In Lithuania, it lasted for 5 years only, but it was not a full reform. It was a partial reform when only reinvested profits were taxed at zero rate. But the full model is so special because there is no difference between the financial and fiscal accounting at all. And the tax authorities are only interested at a company's profit when it is allocated, when it becomes dividends, and it takes away a big problem of advance payment, because in traditional profit taxation system, profits are taxed in advance. You pay at the beginning of the year already for the profit which you are expecting by the end of that year. So this model completely cancels this advance payment, and it allows to pay profit tax only when you really have cash flow to allocate dividends and to pay taxes. So I think it also is helpful because then the society understands really that the role of profit is to be reinvested, to serve the society by building infrastructure, building new jobs, creating more opportunities for all people who are in the same ecosystem.
Yes, but also profit gives a signal to other entrepreneurs that there's an opportunity in this market, that you can compete with the existing companies, or you can come up with a new innovative product. And so that's a signal. But also I think you hit upon a very important issue about politics, because politics is also the art of the possible. And as politicians, we cannot be over philosophical, because people say, well, how does that put food on the table? Or how does that pay for cleaner streets, or my transport system or my health system? So I think we have to be very pragmatic about what happens when, what happens to profits, actually what happens to taxpayers' money when it's collected from taxpayers.
Yeah, being philosophical and pragmatic sometimes is a possible balance.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Not always.
Yes.
And it brings me back to the question of ethics of business.
Yes.
If a person who runs a business believes that business is a moral evil, but still have to seek profit, then the whole activity becomes really immoral. But if a person comprehends that profit is a good servant of the society, and the main question of morality is the means by which I attain this profit, then morality becomes really practicable thing, and a person really has an opportunity to advance as a moral agent. And it is such a pity that not many people really understand this and practice. And especially when we work with young people, it's such a strong will to share this knowledge, because it depends how they will build their companies, how they will earn their profits.
Yes, no, I think that's important, but I think there is a variation here, which is a lot of young people. And I don't want to stereotype here, because it's very easy for someone of my age to talk about young people as an abstract notion. But I think they do want to see their business have a social purpose. And we can explain the role that profit has in social purpose. If a company makes money, that it pays taxes, that means the state can provide services, or the company itself is able to do something positive in a society, allow its workers to work in civil society, or fund civil society, or do something good. This is why you see a lot of companies have their social purpose. Now, some of it is marketing, but some of it is genuine. People want to, they say, give something back. Or some people say to me, actually, I never took anything. I want to share my good fortune with others.
Yeah, but the direct product and the direct service of the company is the best service to the society. And to understand that this is my first role in the society, I think this is so important.
Well, I think it changes in modern society with Amazon, for example. I don't want to pick on Amazon. I think they have a wonderful service. If I need anything, I can go straight there and buy something, and that provides provides a service for me, but it's it's very easy to buy things nowadays, and quite often people finding themselves, they buy lots of things for themselves that they don't need. And especially with our fast consumer market, where people buy clothes and then throw them away, that I think raises lots of questions for people about waste. But how do you get that right balance between having a prosperous society which you encourage business that makes money, that pays taxes, or reinvests in its workforce, provides work with dignity? At the same time, there will be some people who are over-consumerist. Now, we have to be careful. It's not my role to tell people what they should and shouldn't buy, but when it leads to waste and maybe environmental damage, then people will have concerns. And I think, once again, we have to show where there might be a positive role for business in that space, because at the same time, if you want to solve a lot of the environmental problems, you need entrepreneurs who have good environmental ideas. And the environmental problems are going to be solved by entrepreneurs who see a solution. They might come up with so-called green technology.
Yeah, but the same technology can be used also to promote a sustainable way of life.
Yes.
And we in Lithuania have a very famous company which is creating a digital market for selling second-hand clothes.
Yes, exactly.
So, and it's booming again.
Exactly.
So it's important if people have their dreams, have their spirit, they want to do something else, they still can use the same market opportunities and succeed.
Exactly. And I think we have to warn people or tell people, I think the person who gave the talk also talked about the goose that laid the golden eggs, and we have to make sure that even though there might be no system is perfect. There will be some concerns and problems with every system. There will be waste and over-consumerism, for example. But there are, as you say, there are also market solutions.
Syed, you presented a gift to King Charles at his coronation on behalf of the Muslim community of United Kingdom. May I ask you about the role of Muslim faith in creating the grounds for the free market, for business spirit? It looks like as the West goes more and more into the communist or socialist ideals, and the East is quasi-state market undertaking, it looks like the Muslim world can take a proper place in building a new heroes of free market. Is it right?
I think it depends. I think one of the things about particularly Islam and economics has been, particularly in this century, has been dominated by very much a socialistic interpretation of economics, and I think that's partly due to, in many countries, were colonies, were colonized, and what the people of the left did very cleverly was they associated colonialization and imperialism with the right. So they associated mercantilism with free trade. And therefore the reaction after independence in many countries was it was the capitalists who kept us down, and therefore Marxism or socialism is a solution. And I think we are far enough away now from independence in many of those countries that they understand that wasn't, they now are turning to this idea that if they want wealth, they need to encourage business, there needs to be profit that they can reinvest back in the economy. So that's not just in the Islamic world, that's in many former colonies are now turning to be more attractive to a business environment. But I think in Islam, someone you may have heard of, Dr. Benedict Kohler, has written, he writes a lot about the Abrahamic faiths and free markets and capitalism. And he wrote a wonderful book called Islam and Early Capitalism. And he talks about the role of the Prophet Muhammad, and he talks about the fact that Muhammad was a business person, a businessman, In fact, his wife was a businesswoman. He was an entrepreneur. He took risks, by investing in caravans that were on trade. He also talks in his books about early venture capital coming out of the Islamic world and then being passed on to traders in Italian city-states, which was then passed on. Now, of course, some people dispute that, but he talks very convincingly about the Islam and markets and Islam and capitalism. And I think many people have forgotten those early days of Islam and have interpreted it the way they wanted to, or mixed it very much with socialism. And many things, many faiths, you'll have Christian socialists, you'll have Christian liberals, you'll have Christian conservatives, same thing with Judaism and other faiths. And up to now, I think the dialogue on economics has been very dominated by a more socialistic interpretation of Islam, rather than now, fortunately, we have many authors who talk about, like Mustafa Akyol or Ali Salman and others, who write about Islam and economics or Islam and freedom. And so there is this, I think, battle back of ideas in the faith. In 2011, myself, Linda Whetstone and a few others, we set up a network called the Islam and Liberty Network. And what we wanted to do was to show there was no inherent contradiction between Islam and liberty and Islam and free markets. And so we wanted to encourage a number of writers from across the world, either in Muslim-majority countries or in Muslim-minority countries, to write about Islam and freedom, Islam and liberty, but also to get those texts translated into all other languages, into Farsi, into Arabic, into French, into Malaysian, all these languages. So we have a discourse of liberty and free market ideas in the Islamic world.
So you actually answered my question about the contradiction. Is there a contradiction between Islam and liberty and free market? But could you elaborate on the most popular myths? How people would contradict them? Oh
yes, I mean, look, if in any religious text, you can choose certain parts of the text and then draw conclusions from it. And this is what I think, for example, Islam and liberty, particularly liberty rather than free markets. There's a verse in the Quran that says, I believe what I believe, and you believe what you believe. I shall not believe what you believe, and you will not believe what I believe. For you is your faith, and for me is mine. And for me, that is the essence of liberty and freedom of choice. But of course, there will be other texts in the Quran that people can point to have their own interpretation, and sometimes there are inherent contradictions. Some of my Christian friends tell me when they're looking at the Bible, and my Jewish friends tell me when they're looking at the Torah, that they can see contradictions, and we have to remember the issue of context.
Right.
When was that?
But 2,000 years ago, exactly, and more.
And also, when that surah, that verse of the Quran, was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, if you believe that, what was the context that it was for? So, for example, the most obvious thing that's quite often said by both extremists but also neoconservatives who want to see Islam as the enemy, they will find a verse in the Quran that says, "Keep not for your friends Muslims and Jews." But there's also a verse in the Quran that says, "Respect the people of the book," and the people of the book are the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians in that context. And you have to think about the context. And the context of the first one was that at the time, we were a very tribal society. The tribes were at war. It was more complicated than that. Sometimes a Muslim tribe and a Christian tribe will be in alliance. Other times they might have disagreements. And it's a bit about when you are at war, be careful what you say. And if you think about in my country, in Britain, in World War II, there were posters saying, "Be careful what you say or who you speak to." So, I think that's the context you have to understand it. It's not an absolute for all time. Keep not for your friends, Christians and Jews. What about this text that says, respect the people of the book? And what about the practice over centuries where Muslims, Jews and Christians have got on very well? And in fact, when they've got on incredibly well, you've seen a flourishing of philosophy and science and arts. So what is the
biggest difference between a practicing Muslim and a practicing Christian in business?
I don't think there's that much difference, to be honest. I think
any difference?
I'm trying to think, and I mean, in fact, I've never had this question before, so I am thinking on the spot. I think they both want to do good. I think they both want to, when they make the money, I think they want to do good with that money. Now, some of them may just give away an awful lot of their money, or by virtue of being richer, they can give more money away to good causes, whether that be directly or whether that be when they go to church on a Sunday or to the mosque or masjid on a Friday. But I think I think one of the things that we have to remember is that the faiths, particularly the Abrahamic faiths, but also other faiths, have a lot more in common than they differ. And I mean, some people will talk about natural law, and they'll talk about how there are inherently good and bad things, and that's something I think most of the faiths agree on. They will agree stealing is bad, don't cheat people, don't backbite, be nice to your neighbour, look after the poor. I think most people of all faiths will agree with that. I think it's what they actually do with their money that might be different slightly.
Do not cheat. Is it easy to keep it in business? Why so many people believe that any exchange is a zero-sum game? Either you abuse me or I abuse you. So for many people, the miracle of exchange as an act of equality, as an act of mutual benefit, it's hidden from their understanding.
It is, but I think it also happens at all levels. I mean, you think about trade at the moment. You think about what Donald Trump is saying in the United States about tariffs and deficits. And he's talking about America's deficit with another country. But if you think about trade, in reality, it's not countries or governments who trade with each other. It's people and businesses in one country that trade with people and businesses in another country. And mostly, it's for mutual benefit. And if you think about a simple transaction, I have a service or a product that you want, and you buy it from me, and I give it to you, I've got the money, but you could say that you are in deficit and I have a surplus. But actually, that's only monetary. But you have bought something that you wanted, perhaps needed, and you have gained something and I have gained something. So when, for example, American companies or America is said to have a deficit with Japan or with China, in reality, what has happened, someone in China or Japan has produced a product that an American wants to buy. And they don't feel that they're in deficit. They feel that they've gained something from that transaction for mutual benefit. And I think even centre-right politicians, when they talk about trade deficits, forget about the fact that trade is not about between governments. It's between people and businesses in one country and people and businesses in another country for mutual benefit.
Right, and it means that the final result depends on so many spontaneous decisions, on so many deals.
Yes.
They're not completely spontaneous, but they're not coordinated from the center, right?
Exactly.
You cannot coordinate them from the center, how many deals will be done.
Exactly.
And whether the money will move one way or the products will move that way.
Yes.
No one can really control that. And this is the beauty.
But also, if you think about, okay, if we get rid of the deficit, and we have a surplus, what does that mean in reality? You will have lots of money, but money itself does not bring happiness.
Especially modern money.
Exactly, and it doesn't bring. It's not a product that you might need. It doesn't. For example, if you need a washing machine or a car or something like that, is it better to have the money, or is it better to have the product that you want? Or if you want to help someone, is it better to have that money, or is it better to have the product? But then if you pay that money to someone else and they give you a product or service in return, you are then in deficit. I think we have to explain this idea of deficit.
So what will happen with the tariffs? What is your prediction?
I genuinely don't know. And the reason I say that, because I have not, like many people, worked out what Donald Trump's strategy is. I hear two different views. When I was in the European Parliament, I remember speaking to the head of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. And I also remember speaking to the American ambassador to the EU. And he told me, what you have to understand about Donald Trump is that if he feels there is an unfair trade relationship, deficit or surplus, whatever we think about that, he thinks, how is he going to convince you to change the terms of the game? So what he does, he will announce something like very high tariffs on your steel, and then you have to pick up the phone to him and start talking, and the negotiation starts. And then he'll come back with a counteroffer. So think about, for example, when Trump was first president in his first term, and he put tariffs on European products. So the Europeans had to pick up the phone to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump apparently said to the European negotiators, OK, let's do a deal. Let's have 0% tariffs, 0 non-tariff barriers, and 0 subsidies. And the Europeans said to him, that's wonderful, but can you deliver that politically? I can't deliver that in Europe. Can you deliver that in America? And so the strategy in many ways is to announce a tariff or a non-tariff barrier to make the other side pick up the telephone and then start negotiations. And that's, you heard with China, Trump put some tariffs on, and then the Chinese, he started speaking. Same with the Europeans, same with the British. Now, the problem with tariffs is that it also hurts your own side, because America does not make everything and all the small components it needs for its products. So if it's paying more for the intermediary products, the steel that it cannot get from America, so it has to buy from elsewhere, then that will be an increased cost of production, and that cost will be passed on to consumers. So tariffs, it goes into a zero-sum game. Not a zero-sum game, into a diminishing game. There's a wonderful graph from the League of Nations, and it shows a spiral, and it talks about the trade tariffs after Smoot-Hawley in the earlier part of last century, when the Americans put on tariffs, and there was counter tariffs, and you saw a spiral and how world trade declined in volume, and that's the concern about tariffs. We need more trade. We need more people to be able freely to sell their products and services to each other in the world, and trade in many ways is good. There are negative sides to trade for some individuals, and I think one of the things that we have done very badly, people like me who believe in free trade, is to understand that in any trade or any change, there are winners and losers. There are usually dispersed winners, so they're not very well organised. They don't get together and go, great, I like free trade, we need more free trade. But quite often there are concentrated losers. So it might be the farmers in one community, it might be a particular industry, and they are well organised, and they will campaign against free trade.
So you mean winners and losers of the reform, of certain change,
yeah, exactly.
not of the exchange in itself?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it could be because, for example, if you open up your market to a product or products from overseas, then your local domestic producers might lose from the competition. But the consumers win.
Yes.
Now, some people say, well, the consumers are also workers, and there's a whole argument there. But what we don't think about enough is if you have a town that has only one factory, for example, and then suddenly you've got competition, that company, if it does not respond to the competition, it might go bust, and those people might lose jobs. And when you don't have very good labour mobility, you might get a town where for generations people do not move, and they do not, and they live in, they're less well off. And I don't think we think enough about, can we capture some of those benefits to help those who lose out? But when government tries to do that, it can be very cumbersome.
I have two questions. First is how UK feels about its competitiveness now, being outside the EU and in this big global time of changes. And the second question is about those people in some provincial towns who maybe years ago lost their jobs and they got used to live on welfare, and they continue to live on welfare, and their grandchildren are living on welfare.
Yes. I think on the EU, there was always a debate, as you know. It was. I thought the referendum itself was very interesting because you had a very simple question: should we stay or should we leave? And you had coalitions on both sides, people who would not normally work with each other, but were part of the same campaigns. So on the Remain side, you had the whole range of views. You had people who wanted to be part of this United States of Europe for the future, all the way through to people who said, there's a lot about the European Union I don't like, but I worry about the short-term or medium-term impact of leaving. Then on the Leave side, you had all sorts of coalitions. You had liberals who believed that the EU was a very socialist model. You had Marxists and people on the left who thought it was a neoliberal project. They disagreed, but they agreed that the EU was a bad thing. You also had people who worried about the long-term competitiveness of the EU and thought that we would be better off outside the EU, being able to trade with the rest of the world.
So how those groups of people feel now?
I don't think many of those people have changed their mind, if I'm honest about it. I mean, the people who have not got over the referendum and regret the referendum will still say, oh, people have changed their mind, blah, blah, blah. But remember, the polls before the referendum said that Remain would win. But the problem was a lot of people spoke only to other Remainers, if that makes sense. So I think, the fact is the Labour government, many of their base was both Leavers and Remainers. And Labour have been quite clear they're not going to rejoin the EU. But they will want a closer relationship with the EU. But at the same time, we have signed trade agreements. We've joined the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and we're signing trade agreements with India. We'll probably sign an agreement with USA. At the moment, I understand my government is negotiating with the Chinese on a trade agreement. So. We understand that we have left, and we have to make the most of it. There were some interruptions, of course, with any change. Yeah. There would be some friction that came in, but I think longer term, most people, not everyone, but some people have said, look, we've left, let's get on with it, and let's build the best relationships. And frankly, a lot of the growth in the world is not coming from Europe. It's coming from the rest of the world. How do we capture that? The second question I think is very interesting, particularly for people like me who are free traders, which is when there has been change or an old industry is closed down, whether it be the old coal mines or whether it be a factory that used to make, an area where you used to make textiles, for example, and they've closed down. I don't think we thought enough about those who lose out. And I think that's something that we should have thought about a bit more, and we should have thought about how we retrain those people and help them.
Not just give money.
Yeah, it's not just give money, but also, in some ways, I think we fell into the trap. Creative destruction. That's it. That's the way the world works. There's always change, and these things, new companies grow, old companies die. That's the way of the world. But I don't think we thought enough about the people, and we assumed that people would be self-motivated to find a new role or to move. We don't have as much labour mobility in the United Kingdom as we have in the rest. For example, in parts of the United States, if you want to come to, for example, London and the southeast, where there are lots of jobs, and you're from a northern town, it's very expensive. But there's also another element which I think is interesting. I remember years ago, my first degree was at Liverpool University, and I was up there visiting, and on the train back, I met a young lady from Liverpool who had left Liverpool, moved to London, and she said to me that her ex-boyfriend and some of her family resented her. Because she had left Liverpool, and she said, and she had moved to London. She had a new boyfriend in London, and her ex-boyfriend thought she was some sort of gold digger. And she said to me, all I wanted to do was improve my life. I saw there were no opportunities there. This was the 1980s, 1990s. I saw what was happening to my town, and I went looking for jobs elsewhere. And so I don't know, there is obviously some sort of issue. I don't know how strong it is. That might just be anecdotal, not very scientific. But how do we encourage people, first of all, to be able to move elsewhere for a job? Or secondly, how do we help retrain those people? Now, I would have liked the trade unions themselves to take responsibility. These workers used to pay their fees into trade unions. Why don't the trade unions help retrain the people for the new skills? And funny enough, it might actually help the trade unions, because if those people set up a new business, they might then want all their workers to join the trade union, and the trade union would grow.
Excellent idea.
But so I proposed this in a paper a very long time ago, but I think the trade unions will say, oh no, the government should give us some money for this. But it's a shame that, because the trade unions in our country have a very long history of working men's clubs, educational institutes for workers, but a lot of that collapsed after the advent of the welfare state.
It's an excellent idea, and especially in modern times when many people will have to change their profession and their professional capacities many times throughout their life.
Yes.
It should not be only the role of the government to train.
I agree, yes.
But it could be community, and trade union very organically could contribute to that.
No, I agree. I mean, we know, as I say to my children, that when my father came to Britain in the 1950s, he worked on the railways and the buses. And that was supposed to be his life. I mean, he did later on. He moved to America, and he had other jobs. And in fact, he ended up as a bus driver in America for the yellow school buses. But for me, when I'm saying to my 23-year-old and my 20-year-old, I've said to them, just try any job. You might have to change jobs a number of times. And one day I counted the number of jobs I've had since I was 18 or since I was 21, 22. And I think it came up to about 10 jobs, and I'm constantly changing. So I think, we have to understand that, and I think the younger people understand that it's not just one job for life. And in fact, I don't think many of them want to do that. I don't think they want to.
Right.
I remember when I was travelling from where I lived in North London by train to the city to go and work for a bank for 2 years, I thought to myself, do I really want to do this for the next 40 years of my life? And I think young people want more than that. But I also have to be very careful. I don't know what young people want. Everyone's individual. But I think we have to encourage our younger generation to understand that that they may have multiple careers and multiple changes, and we have to encourage a lifelong learning. We never stop learning. When I teach my students at university, I learn from them as much as they're supposed to learn from me.
Excellent.
Oh, I'm sorry, I speak a lot.
No, that is, I think it is an excellent bridge between the needs of young people here in Lithuania and how we view the necessity not just to give welfare to those who lose their job, but to provide them an opportunity to reinvent themselves.
Yes.
And also to find a community, and always professional training gives such an opportunity to meet other people, to find out how I can be successful again.
Yes.
And with this hope, I thank you.
Well, thank you.
Syed Kamall, professor at St. Mary's University. And I am Elena Leontjeva, the president of the Lithuanian Free Market Institute. I wish you a very good stay in Lithuania, and thank to our viewers. We will meet again in 2 weeks' time. Stay tuned.